Okay, everybody, we're back on that Dana 30, and I'm putting some U-joints in the axle shafts now. This is completely frozen up. You can't even move this without hitting it. U-joints are no good in there. What I'm putting in is a standard greasable U-joint, and that's just for a stock application. This is a factory stock rebuild on this Jeep, is what the customer tells me. I don't put the greasable ones in if you're doing any kind of off-roading or anything like that, because the grease fittings and the channels they cut in there make them weaker. So you have to match your U-joint to your application, and this is just a stock rebuild, so that should be fine. And I'm going to show you how to change a U-joint without any special tools or anything. If you're on a trail or something, you need to change a U-joint. You could just do it with a hammer and and a vise. And you should always have a basic tool set when you're out on the trail, and somebody should have a vise on their rig for doing things just like this. So these ears are very tender. If you put a C-clamp style U-joint remover on there and you don't set it up right, you could bend and break these. Right where it's very thick here, we have the side of it clamped in the vise tight. Right where it's real thick, we're just going to bang on that and knock this joint out. This one's real rusty. Yours shouldn't be like this, but try and get that off there. Yeah, I think this one's going to be a bear. Let me go grab a vice grip, see if we can get that separated from there. Usually I'll just pull off when it gets to that point. But it's very rusty in there, I'm sure. Hang in there, I'll be right back. Okay guys, this is a miserable U-joint here. Completely rusted in there. You couldn't even get a needle bearing out of there if you tried. They're all kind of smeared into one. You can see that's very rusty. Don't let your U-joints get to this point. It's just a disaster. This is a non-greasable one, and when you have a non-greasable U-joint and you do any kind of off-roading or anything like that, get in there every couple years or more often if you have to, and just change those things out, because they don't last forever with the amount of grease that's in them. I'm going to continue on, try and get the other side out. Okay, after a lot of fussing and banging and trying to get that out, you can see how much rust was in there and how bad this is. A U-joint like this would just explode if you ever tried to drive or anything. So there's the first half off. I'm going to set this half up, and I'm going to grab this area here, or we can rest it right on top of the vise, and we'll get this side out. That's another one that's stuck in there. I'm going to have to work on that one. But you can see how bad they are. Do not let your U-joints get this bad. Stay after them and change them if you have to, or grease them regularly. Okay guys, I'm going to put our new greasable joint in there. And when you put this in, that is your grease fitting. That goes towards the inside of the vehicle. So this is the little stub shaft. So it'll go in facing that way. It's just easier to grease that way. You can put it any way you want, but it's easier to grease when you face it toward the back. Now we're just going to start a cap in here. And we're going to get that seated in the cap, and then just tap that cap in a little bit. I'll start the other side. Tap that in just a little bit. Okay, at this point we can use the vise to squeeze them in a little bit. And I'll get these squeezed in and then show you how to set the snap rings. Okay, we got the caps in there. And here's your little snap ring. And before you put the snap ring in, drop it in the groove there. Make sure it's going to fit. If you put the snap ring in and it doesn't fit in the groove and it slides over the outside there, you're going to spread your snap ring. It's going to expand, potentially break, and it won't be good anymore. So just try it. That's laying in there just fine. Make sure it fits in the groove, and then just tap it in. And then just look at it, make sure it's in the groove all around. And that's one side, and we'll do the same to the other side now. Okay, I've got a cap started in the bottom. We're going to put our U-joint together. Drop it right in there and just give it a tap so it stays. And then we're just going to set the top one. And it's the same procedure that we did on the last one. We're just going to put those in there, tap them together, and then we'll set the snap rings. And I'll be back with you in a little bit when it's all done. Okay guys, U-joints together. We're going to slip the grease fitting in there. Tighten that down. And that type of grease fitting is not a regular grease fitting. It's a low profile one. You need a needle greaser, such as this one. And that will go in there, push the little detent down. It'll hook into your grease gun right here. Regular grease fitting on there. Pull that over, and then just hit that with some grease. And we're going to grease the whole rear end before it leaves, but you do it with a needle greaser like this. Pick that up at any auto parts store. Press it in there real good so you don't get grease everywhere, and grease will flow right into that U-joint and it'll last a long time. Okay, let's get this out of vise, and we'll get set up over at the axle, and we'll put this in, put the spindle on, and I'll show you a few more tips. Okay guys, have a little bit of grease on the surface that's going to hit the inner seal there, and we're going to put this in. And don't get real enthusiastic about sliding in there. You don't want to pop your seal out. Just feel your way through there. You got to pick it up a little bit and just feel it going through the seal. And then there we are, seated into the spider gears. So that's in. We got grease on that, won't tear up the seal. Now we're going to put our spindle kit on here. We'll put the spindle bearing in, and there's a seal there and a spacer and stuff, and I'll show you that next. Okay, we had to change the spindles on this axle because there was some kind of gorilla that took these off last time. I think you can see all these hammer marks and all these marks in here. Remember when we took this apart, we used the slide hammer with the correct tool. This is what you get when you don't do that and you just beat this thing. You can see it was corroded in there. And if you beat it and you put marks on it like that right on the bearing surface, you're just headed for bad times. So, you know, be nice to your spindles. If you don't have the tool to take them off, go rent it or buy it or something. Don't grab a sledgehammer and start taking those off like that, because you just ruin your bearings next time around. So we have brand new spindles for this. I'm going to put those on next. Okay, here's our brand new spindle. Nice and clean. And this is a spindle kit. You get your seal, you get a plastic spacer, you got another seal. This is your spindle bearing. Hang on, let me get reset for this so that we can get this in right. Okay, we got to get that spindle bearing in there, and I use this little stepped, this is what you use to take out carrier bearings and stuff. I have a whole assortment of these. I use them for a lot of different things. It fits in there just nice, and we're just going to tap that in there. Okay, when it starts to get flush, you want to continue a little further because you want to get your seal in there too. So I don't want to get this guy stuck in there, so this fits perfect. This is a socket that fits perfect in that hole. I'm just going to drive it down a little bit. So we want to have room for that guy in there. So just test it out, make sure that fits, and that fits in there real nice. So we're going to put a little bit of grease in there. There was a little bit of blue grease in there. We're going to add just a little bit more. And spindle bushings are the type of things that need routine maintenance. Don't think it's good for the life of the vehicle. You got to get in there and pull the spindle every now and again and lube it. There's a seal here. I'm going to stick that right in there. That's ready to go on. We've got these two pieces that still need to go on the axle shaft, and we'll put those on now. Okay, we've got our first seal on there. It's got that lip that faces forward. The flat side goes up against your dust ring there. Then you've got this plastic spacer, and it's got a bevel on one side. That bevel is going to go in because you've got a radius here right between the spindle surface and the back there. And so you put that bevel in there like that. Spindle goes on next. We'll get that seated in there. Okay, that'll take just a tap to get that seated in there, and we'll get that in there, and then I'll show you the new dust shields that I got for this. Okay, if you remember when we took these apart, the dust shields were missing. There was just remnants of rust behind all the nuts. These are stainless steel. They're very nicely made. Those will go on like that. And make sure when you put your nuts back on here, you use lock nuts. The factory used lock nuts. I don't reuse them. I always use new lock nuts on here because that holds your whole spindle and wheel and hub on and everything. You don't want to skimp on junk there. So I have lock nuts for that. We'll put those on. Then we will put the wheel bearings in the hubs, get these pressed onto the rotors, and set this whole thing. And I've got some new worn hubs for this as well, and I'll show you that as it happens. Okay, we've got our lock nuts on a spindle, and I use these nylon inserted lock nuts. You could use any kind of lock nut you like, but I like a lock nut on here. The factory used a all steel lock nut with the interrupted thread on the top. These are easy to get. You get these just about anywhere, and they work real good. You can reuse them again, but every time you use them they get a little less effective. So we got these on. You take those down to between 40 and 45 foot-pounds. Both sides are done. Next thing, I have to get the new rotors. I have to get the studs pressed in, new rotors onto the hubs, and we'll put the wheel bearings on, and I'll show you how to adjust those correctly. Okay guys, we've got to get the studs pressed in, and I get the rotor attached to the hub. And if you've been watching my videos, you've seen I have this set up here for doing just this job. It's just something I made. Turned up a piece of steel on a lathe and drilled some holes, and it's just helpful when you're trying to press studs in. You know, I see a lot of guys, you know, they'll try and put a socket under the stud or something like that, and you need a bunch of hands to try and get that stuff done. But this works real good. It's if you do any of this kind of work, it's worth making that little jig there. See how nice and sturdy that is when you press the stud in. And you'll notice these studs got a little bit of rust on them. I always like to reuse original studs when they're in good condition. They're just much nicer than the aftermarket stuff you can get. These studs were in very good shape, so I'm reinstalling them in there. I'll get both of these finished up and I'll meet you back over at the bench and we will grease the hubs and set the bearings in there. Okay guys, here's another look at that stud setting jig that I have. A lot of guys were interested in that when I showed him on the Willys video, but it works all the way up to the CJs, up to 86. And that's a nice stable way to press your studs in. It works out real good. You don't need an extra set of hands at the press there to get them in, and these are in nicely. And the next thing we're going to do is set our cups in there for the bearings. I have a kit here from Crown. They make a wheel bearing kit. You get your inner and your outer and your seal there. It's a nice way to go. A little bit cheaper if you buy it as a kit. So there's our inner. The bigger bearing is your inner. And I just put that in there. And I use these aluminum drivers. There's usually a handle that goes in there, but I don't use them with the handle. And it fits in the cup real nice. And you could feel when it's there, it'll jump right out at you. And that's seated real nice. And we'll grab our inner cup. That one seats way down in there. And if you take a look, you just make sure it's all the way in there. And we'll move on now to greasing the bearings and installing them and put the hub seal in there and then get them mounted on the spindle. Okay guys, you've probably seen me do this before. If not, this is the type of bearing packer I like to use. Stick the bearing in there, put your cap on, and then just squeeze it. And the grease comes right up and out, and that's a perfectly greased bearing. And we'll do this to all the bearings and get them set into the hub. Okay, when you're greasing your hubs, you grease your bearings just like I showed you there. If you don't have a packer, you just sit there and squeeze it in by hand. Just in your palm, just pack it in there. And you see, if you can see in here, there's a little recess in there into the hub. So you take some grease on your fingers, fill up that recess until it's flush with your bearing cups. Fill up that whole groove that's in there. It doesn't take much, but it's critical you put it in there. Okay, now we've got a layer of grease in there that's flush with our cups. Take our inner, put it right in there, clean off the excess grease. Now we're going to set our seal in there. Okay, we're just going to tap that seal in there a little bit at a time. When that's flush, you're good. Take a little bit of grease from your bearing and smear it all around the rubber so that that's not running on your spindle surface dry. Okay. Okay, our hub and rotor are on. Bearings are in there. And I have a new nut and washer kit. You're going to get 2 nuts and 2 washers. When I put spindles on, I usually try and keep the groove up so I can see what's going on. This is your first washer to go on. That's going to fit in the groove. So that guy goes on there. Everything's a little greasy, so it's a little slippery. And then you put a nut on there. I'm going to get a socket to tighten that nut, and I'll show you how to adjust the wheel bearings once I start torquing that nut down. Okay guys, this is a lot easier to do when this is in the vehicle. It's kind of a pain just on the bench here. We've got our washer, we've got our first nut in there. We tighten that down, turn the wheel bearings a little bit as you're tightening it down. Your final torque on that right now is going to be 50 foot-pounds. I'm going to have to hold it in here and hold the axle from spinning over, but let me just flick it again to be sure. Okay, there's 50 foot-pounds. That's a little snug. Now that's your nut. What you're going to do now is back this off 1 flat. So if this flat's up here, 1 flat you turn it. You back it off 1 flat, and that sets your preload on that. So I'm going to back that off, and then I'll show you what we do next. Okay guys, your next washer to go in is this. It's got a little bent tab on it. You can put that forward or backward. It doesn't really matter as long as it's in the groove. Okay, there's your second nut that goes on next. Kind of hard working sideways with the camera, so I don't get in the way of the camera, but there it goes. And when you're doing wheel bearing work, just get yourself a socket. Don't use a chisel on these things. It just beats up the nuts, and you can't get real torque out of a chisel. You pick these up anywhere. This fits from 1941, the first World War II Jeep, right up to 86. So 1 socket will do all the Jeep work that you need it to do. You know, on the CJs at least. Some of the other Jeeps are a little bit bigger, like the FC170 has a bigger wheel bearing, but if you're doing CJ stuff, that 1 socket's going to last a long time. Okay, this guy goes down to 50 foot-pounds as well. I'll try and hold everything and torque it. Okay, there it goes. Let's check it one more time. Okay. Now that sets the wheel bearings. And what I do now is I go in here with a bar, and I'm going to roll that washer over onto that nut so it can't loosen up. I'll be right back with you. Okay guys, it takes a big bar to roll that lip over. You really got to pull on that. And I hope you can see in there. That washer is now laying flat up against the flat of the nut, and that can't loosen now. That's how you lock your wheel bearing nut in there. That's nice and smooth running. There's no play in that at all. And when you do new wheel bearings like this, when everything's new, you got new cups, new bearings, we got new everything, new spindle, new everything on this. So it's a good idea to run this maybe 500 miles, get back in here, unfold that, take your first nut off and your washer, re-torque your second nut, and then you know, put your outer nut back on. You know, maybe around 500 miles, just to make sure everything is seated right and you're not going to have any trouble. Okay, we're on to putting a new set of hubs on here, and this is a set of worn hubs I'm starting to put on, and I got this one with 2 bolts in it. It has an O-ring right here for sealing. No gasket needed. The O-ring does all the sealing you need. Comes with a new snap ring, and you put this on, and the snap ring goes on the end of your axle there in the groove. Sometimes you got to get on your U-joint in the knuckle housing there and pry it forward so you can get the snap ring on there. Make sure that is in the groove properly. Do whatever you have to do. I had to take this bar and go in here behind on the U-joint and pry the axle out just a little bit so that the snap ring would snap in the groove. Absolutely critical that the snap ring goes in the groove, otherwise you're going to have problems. So I'm going to put these other 4 bolts in. Now 1980 was the last year that they used the 6-bolt hub. After that, 81 and later, they switched to a 5-bolt hub. I don't know why they did that. I don't believe it was as strong. I think the hubs in general were weaker, 81 and up. But 1980 was the last year you're going to get 6 bolts in your hub, and I think that's the strongest setup. But I mean, no big deal. The other ones are okay also. I just want to let you know, don't go getting later hubs and think they're going to fit on a earlier Jeep. Up to 1980, 6 bolts. After that, 81 to 86 was a 5-bolt hub. Okay, I'm going to put these bolts in, and then I'll move on to the other side, and then we'll put the rest of this together with the dial there, so you can select 4-wheel drive and stuff. And there's a gasket for that. I'll show you how I put that on in a minute. Okay, now we're putting the dial in here, and these bolts here go down to 30 inch-pounds, and a lot of guys way over tighten those, and some guys way under tighten them, and this is usually a problem for people. They're coming out, or they snap, or whatever. The only way to really know you got 30 inch-pounds is to actually measure it, and we'll set up. I got the blue line set to 30, and we'll just pull that right to 30 inch-pounds. And go around all of them, 30 inch-pounds, and we know it's right, we know they won't loosen, and we know we're not going to break them. Okay guys, that's 30 inch-pounds there, 30 inch-pounds, and we'll just keep going through them. Pull that right to the blue line. And we know to torque properly if we measure it, and that's how I recommend doing those until you do a bunch of them and you can really feel and know what 30 inch-pounds is. I recommend just a inch-pound torque wrench, and that way you know it's right. A lot of times these hubs come into me and they're broken off, and it's a real pain to get them out. So do it right the first time, and you only have to do it that one time. You'll be all set. Okay everybody, what you're looking at here is the completed Dana 30 front end. Rotors are on, calipers. These are new calipers. I've had too much bad luck in the past with the remanufactured calipers. These are brand new calipers. I got some Wagner pads on here. I've got brand new hardware kit, my slide, the fastening bolt, that's all brand new. We got some Raybestos hoses on here. No junk Chinese stuff on this axle. There's our finished worn hubs. Those are new rotors. We've got our stainless steel shields back there. Our brake hose with 2 brand new copper washers, 1 on each side of the fitting. Everything is greased. Ball joints are greased. U-joints are greased, so we see all the little grease coming out of them. The differential is lubed. I lubed it. I let it sit overnight with the pinion and the yoke pointing down to make sure there was no leaks, and to get some lube on the brand new pinion bearings. And that is topped off. Same thing on the other side. The ball joints are super smooth, and everything at this point is 100% rebuilt and ready to go. I've got to get this on a pallet and safely secured for shipping, and this is going to head down to Florida. So I hope you enjoyed the rebuild of this, and if there's anything else you'd like to see, like I always say, just drop it below in the comments, and I'll try and get it out there for you. But hope you picked up some tips along the way on how to rebuild your own Dana 30. And there it is. This should last a very long time if it's taken care of, and the brakes and everything, being new calipers and stuff, should last basically almost life of the vehicle. But I don't usually like to skimp on brake parts, so that's why I use new calipers. You can get them super cheap, the remanufactured ones, but I've had them leak after like 500 miles or so I don't like to use those anymore. But this one was in tough shape when it came in, but it's ready for service now, and it should give a long service life. So, as always, I appreciate you watching, and I will catch you on the next video.